Chosen one, silence everything around you right now. That whisper in the back of your mind telling you that you should be doing more, trying harder, pushing further. Stop it right there. Heaven has spoken, and the verdict is this: you have done enough. The enemy is working overtime against you today for one reason and one reason only. He knows that the moment you stop striving and finally surrender, everything he has been holding back gets released all at once. It all ends today. The exhaustion of carrying what was never yours to carry, the guilt of feeling like you are behind, the warfare of wondering if God has moved on without you. But here is what you cannot miss. It is not ending because you finally got it right. It is ending because heaven just called time on the assignment you were never meant to complete alone. Think back to that moment this week when you finally stopped. Maybe you sat down in the middle of a task and just could not continue. Maybe you closed your eyes and whispered something like, "I cannot do this anymore." You thought that was weakness. You thought that was you failing God. But that moment of release, that exhale of surrender, was the most powerful thing you have done in months. That was not giving up. That was giving it over. And the moment you did, heaven moved. You did not find this message by accident. The algorithm did not bring you here. God did. This is a divine appointment that was written into the fabric of your timeline before you took your first breath. You are standing at a threshold, and what happens in the next few minutes has the potential to permanently alter the trajectory of your life. Stay until the very last second, because in the next few minutes, I'm going to hand you the divine decree that releases you from the burden of self-reliance. I am going to walk you through the exact moment your surrender became your greatest act of faith. And at the end, we are going to seal this new season with a declaration that closes every door of striving and opens the door to divine takeover. Do not click away. Your future self is begging you to stay, because if you leave now, you may walk back out into the same exhaustion that brought you here, carrying a weight that heaven already said it would carry for you. I know what the last 72 hours have felt like. The atmosphere has not just been heavy, it has been suffocating. Like something is pressing down on your chest, and no matter how many deep breaths you take, you cannot quite get enough air. Maybe you have been waking up before sunrise this week, not because you wanted to, but because the weight of everything pulls you out of sleep before your body is ready. You lie there in the dark, running through the list. Everything you have not done, everyone you have not reached, every prayer that still feels unanswered. Or maybe you have been going through the motions this week, smiling where you need to smile, showing up where you need to show up. But on the inside, you feel completely hollowed out, like you have been giving and giving, and there is simply nothing left to pour from. You feel like you are at the edge of something. Not a breakthrough, just an edge. And you cannot tell if you're about to fly or fall. And in that place, the enemy has been whispering a very specific lie. He has been telling you that the reason you are exhausted is because you are not doing enough. That if you were more disciplined, more consistent, more focused, you would not feel this way. He has been replaying that moment you rested when you could have been working. That moment you said no, when you could have said yes. That moment you pulled back when everything in you wanted to push forward. And he has been telling you that your exhaustion is evidence of your spiritual failure. That the silence you are experiencing is God's disappointment wearing your name. But I need you to hear what the scripture actually says about this moment. Matthew 11:28 says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Listen to what that promise actually contains. Jesus did not say, "Come to me after you have finished." He did not say, "Come to me once you have proven yourself." He said, "Come as you are, weary, burdened, exhausted, emptied out, and I will be the one who gives rest." Not you earning rest, Him giving it. That is not a passive comfort. That is a divine transfer of ownership. He is saying, what you have been carrying, I am taking, and what I am giving you in return is not more responsibility, it is rest. The enemy wants you to believe that your weariness is a sign that you are losing ground. But heaven is saying something completely different. Your weariness is not failure. It is the final symptom of a season that is over. The exhaustion you feel right now is not the weight of a burden that is growing. It is the weight of a burden that is finally leaving. There is a difference between the heaviness of something arriving and the heaviness of something departing. What you are feeling is departure. This is not the beginning of a breakdown. This is the end of a battle you were never supposed to fight alone. You think the moment you stopped trying was the moment you failed. But let me reframe your reality right now. That was not failure. That was faith. That was you finally trusting that God is big enough to do what you could not. And heaven has been waiting for that moment. Not because God needs you to be weak, but because the fullness of what He has for you cannot be received with clenched fists. It requires open hands. You have done enough. Now let Him take over. If everything you just heard made something shift inside you, that was not this message. That was God confirming something He has been trying to tell you for months. But confirmation without action is the most dangerous place a chosen one can be. Because the enemy does not attack those who stay asleep. He attacks those who are one step away from waking up. And that is exactly where you are right now. The inner sanctum was built for this moment. So you wake up every morning to a fresh word from God spoken directly to your spirit. The link is in the first pinned comment. You will know if it is for you the moment you see it. And yet, even as those words land, even as something in your spirit begins to exhale, there is a part of you that does not fully believe it yet. A part of you that has heard words like these before and nodded along, only to wake up the next morning reaching for the same weight you were just told to put down. And I need to address that part directly, because that resistance you feel right now is not skepticism. It is not wisdom. It is a deeply embedded agreement you made with a lie so long ago that it now feels like identity. This lie, woven into the very fabric of your being, whispers persuasively that your existence is contingent upon your relentless output, that your worth is a currency you must perpetually earn through ceaseless effort. It has taken root in the subconscious chambers of your heart, a silent but potent vow that has shaped your perception of yourself and your relationship with the divine. It is not merely a thought you entertain, it is a foundational pillar of how you operate, a deep current flowing beneath the surface of your conscious decisions, making the very idea of true rest feel like a betrayal of who you are or who you are meant to be. This identity, forged in the crucible of past experiences and societal narratives, has become a comfortable, albeit exhausting, cloak you wear. And the thought of shedding it evokes an existential tremor, a fear of being exposed, unvalued or unmoored. Here is what no one has named for you. The reason you keep picking the burden back up is not because you lack faith. It is because somewhere in the story of your life, striving became the thing that made you feel safe. Somewhere along the way, you learned that rest was dangerous, that if you stopped pushing, something would fall apart, that your value was directly connected to your output, and so your body learned to associate stillness with threat. Your nervous system learned to read peace as a warning sign. This deeply ingrained survival mechanism whispers chilling narratives from the past. If you stop, you'll be forgotten. If you relax, you'll lose everything you've built. If you aren't constantly proving yourself, you are nothing. Perhaps it was a childhood where love felt conditional, tied to achievements. Perhaps it was a demanding environment where only the relentless survived. Or perhaps it was a profound disappointment that taught you never to fully let your guard down. This learned association has sculpted your internal landscape, transforming the gentle invitation of peace into an alarm bell, a siren wail of impending chaos. Every fiber of your being, having been conditioned by these powerful early imprints, recoils from the very notion of ceasing, believing that true cessation would mean vulnerability, failure, or even annihilation. It's a cruel paradox. The very antidote to your exhaustion, true rest, is perceived by your system as the greatest threat. And every time heaven opens a door to rest, something in you slams it shut because it feels like the beginning of disaster rather than the beginning of deliverance. It's as if a deep-seated program automatically overrides any divine instruction to simply be, prioritizing self-preservation above all else, even above the very promise of peace that God extends. Think about Elijah. Here is a man who called fire down from heaven, a man who outran chariots, a man whose prayers shut up the rain for 3.5 years. He stood alone on Mount Carmel, a solitary figure against 450 prophets of Baal, and saw God's mighty hand move in undeniable power. He ran with the hand of the Lord upon him, outracing King Ahab's chariot for miles, a superhuman feat of endurance. He was a spiritual titan, a prophet of unparalleled might and unwavering conviction. And yet, in the very next chapter after his greatest victory, after experiencing such profound divine vindication and power, he is found under a broom tree, completely collapsed, asking God to let him die. His spirit was utterly broken, his physical strength depleted, his emotional reserves non-existent. He was not merely tired, he was undone, stripped bare of all his former glory and power, not because he was weak, not because his faith was small, but because he had poured out everything he had, and no one had told him it was safe to stop. No one had given him permission to be human, to feel the crushing weight of such immense spiritual warfare and the subsequent emotional fallout. His inner well was dry, not from lack of effort, but from relentless, unreplenished expenditure. He was a vessel that had given its all, now empty and cracked, longing only for cessation. And the angel of the Lord did not rebuke him, did not preach at him, did not hand him a strategy or a new mission briefing. The angel touched him gently, a touch of compassion, and said, "Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for you." Heaven's response to his breakdown was not a sermon, not a spiritual lecture on resilience, but the most fundamental, tangible expressions of care: bread. It was water. It was the simple, profound permission to rest before the next thing came, an acknowledgement of his humanity and physical needs before any spiritual demands. This divine intervention wasn't about pushing him harder, but about restoring him, nurturing him back to wholeness. It was a testament to God's tender understanding that even his greatest champions need sustenance and stillness. And what's coming next in this message will likely surprise you, because it goes to a place most people in your position have never been taken. But first, this has to land. The thing that kept Elijah running even after his collapse was the same thing that has been keeping you running. He thought the mission depended entirely on him. He cried out, "I alone am left." He believed himself to be the singular bastion of truth, the last defender of righteousness, the only one holding the fragile fabric of God's plan together against a tide of darkness. He said, "I alone am left. I alone am the last one standing. I alone am the one holding this whole thing together." This sentiment, though born from a deep passion for God's purposes, carried with it an immense, self-imposed burden, the weight of the entire kingdom perched precariously on his weary shoulders. And God's response was not to confirm his heroism or commend his self-sacrifice. God did not validate his desperate plea for singular importance. Instead, God offered a humbling yet liberating truth. I have 7,000 in Israel who have not bowed to Baal. You are not as alone as you think. The battle is not as dependent on you as you think. This revelation dismantles the illusion of indispensable singularity. It shatters the myth that your individual effort is the linchpin of divine destiny. It reminds you that God's kingdom is vast, His resources boundless, and His network of faithful servants far greater than your limited perception. And the weight you have been carrying as if the entire outcome rests on your shoulders. That is not faith. That is a counterfeit. That is a cunning mimicry, a heavy burden that masquerades as righteous dedication, but is, in truth, an instrument of the enemy. That is the enemy using your dedication against you, exploiting your pure heart and earnest commitment, dressing your exhaustion up in the language of divine purpose, to keep you striving past the point where God already said enough. It's a subtle spiritual deception, convincing you that to cease is to fail God, when in reality, true faithfulness often calls for a sacred pause, a trusting release of control. Because here is what most people miss entirely. Striving can look like faithfulness. It can feel like obedience. It can even produce results for a season, generating an outward appearance of productivity and spiritual zeal. But there is a version of striving that is not spirit-led. It is self-preservation in a spiritual costume. It is control dressed in the language of consecration, a desperate attempt to manipulate outcomes and secure your own significance under the guise of serving God. This counterfeit striving is like a counterfeit currency. It looks real, it might even buy you something temporary, but its value is ultimately hollow and unsustainable. It's fueled by anxiety, propelled by an underlying fear of insufficiency, and driven by a need to prove rather than to simply be. It's the difference between a river flowing naturally from a source and a pump tirelessly drawing water from a dwindling well. The pump operates on constant effort. The river flows from an inherent, continuous supply. And God, in His infinite mercy, sometimes allows you to arrive at complete emptiness, not to break you in a punitive way, but to break the agreement you unknowingly made with that lie. He doesn't want to destroy you, but to dismantle the flawed mechanism that has been driving you. He desires to shut down the engine that was never his to begin with, the engine of self-reliance and fear that has been masquerading as divine purpose, so that a new, spirit-powered engine can be ignited within you. It is a divine surgical procedure, precise and loving, removing what prevents true life from flowing. And this leads us to something that will reframe everything you thought you knew about delay. Because the reason your breakthrough has not come the way you expected, or the reason a long-awaited promise feels perpetually out of reach, is not that God is withholding. It is not a sign of divine disfavor or a lack of your own spiritual merit. Rather, it is that what He is releasing, the magnitude and nature of the blessing He intends to pour out, requires a version of you that cannot coexist with the striving spirit. Think of a cup that is already full. You cannot pour something new and life-giving into it without first emptying it. If the cup is already overflowing with self-effort, with anxious planning, with the residue of past hurts, with the need for control, there is simply no room for the fresh, abundant wine of heaven. But you have been interpreting the emptying process, the divine deconstruction that feels like a stripping away, as punishment. You have been calling the divine deconstruction a divine abandonment, crying out, "Where are you, God? Why have you left me in this desolate place?" And the enemy, the accuser of your soul, has been more than happy to co-sign that interpretation, amplifying your fears and whispering doubts into your heart, confirming your worst anxieties. Because as long as you believe God has moved on without you, as long as you perceive this period of emptying as a sign of His absence, you will spend every ounce of energy trying to catch up to a God who is not running ahead of you, frantically scrambling to regain ground, you imagine you've lost. The profound truth is that He is standing right where you are, in the very stillness and emptiness you perceive as a wasteland, waiting for you to be still long enough to see it. He waits for you to lay down the frantic pace and simply rest in His presence, to realize that the emptying is His preparation, not His rejection. Stay with me, because what I am about to share next is the part that breaks the cycle, the hidden thing beneath the striving that most people never surface. This is not just intellectual understanding. This is a deeper excavation into the spiritual architecture of your being. There is a version of worthiness you have been trying to earn. Not consciously, not in the part of you that knows theology, that recites scriptures about grace and unmerited favor. That part of you understands the doctrines of salvation and God's unconditional love. But in the deep place, in the primal, foundational place that was formed long before you knew Scripture, long before you could articulate complex spiritual truths, you have been trying to prove something to God, perhaps a lingering sense that you must somehow compensate for perceived shortcomings or past failures. To people who once made you feel like too much or not enough, whose conditional acceptance imprinted a deep wound that still yearns for validation. To the version of yourself that failed in a previous season and has been in self-imposed penance ever since, tirelessly attempting to atone for what you believe to be unforgivable errors. And every act of striving, every refusal to rest, every pushing past your limits, every Herculean effort that leaves you utterly depleted, it has not been pure obedience, flowing from a place of unburdened love and trust. It has been an offering on the altar of self-justification, a desperate plea for validation, a covert attempt to earn the love, acceptance and approval that have already been freely bestowed. You have been working tirelessly to earn what has already been given, like a wealthy heir laboring in the fields for wages he already possesses. You have been running toward a grace you are already standing in, tirelessly pursuing a finish line that is actually the very ground beneath your feet. And the profound exhaustion you feel is not the result of the enemy's resistance, though he may certainly exacerbate it. It is primarily the result of running in circles inside a room where the door was never locked. You have been striving to break free from chains that were never truly there, or at least were broken the moment grace became your reality. Grace was never the reward at the finish line, something you achieve after sufficient effort or exemplary performance. Grace is the very ground you are standing on right now, the invisible, unwavering foundation supporting your every breath and every step. You did not have to do anything to deserve this moment, to qualify for this revelation, or to earn your way into this word that is speaking to your spirit. You were brought here to this exact moment by a God who does not grade on performance, whose love is not a meritocracy, whose acceptance is not contingent upon your achievements or lack thereof. He simply chose you, loved you, and drew you close. And the sooner that profound truth moves from your intellectual mind, from a mere theological concept, into your very bones, becoming a felt reality in your deepest being, the sooner the striving loses its grip. It's like realizing you've been treading water frantically in an ocean, only to discover you've been standing on a solid, unseen platform all along. The moment that realization sinks in, the frantic treading ceases, and you simply stand, upheld by an invisible force, embraced by an unearned reality. But here is where it goes deeper, and I need you to lean in, because this is the confrontation. This is the moment to look unflinchingly at a truth that might sting, but ultimately sets free. There is something beneath the striving, something beneath the performance, something beneath even the paralyzing fear of failure that often dictates your actions. And when you finally see it, when you bring this hidden truth into the light of awareness, everything shifts. The hidden root, the insidious, unseen thing that has been feeding the cycle the entire time, draining your energy and perpetuating your exhaustion, is this: You have not fully trusted that God's plan for your life can survive your rest. You have believed in God's power in theory. You have confessed it with your lips, declared it in your prayers, sung about it in worship. But in practice, in the quiet, decisive moments when you have a choice between pushing forward in your own strength and trusting stillness, between micromanaging and surrendering to divine flow, you have chosen the former. You have chosen relentless effort over radical trust, because somewhere beneath your theology, beneath the intellectual assent to God's omnipotence, you do not actually believe that God's plan for your life is secure enough to withstand your pause, your ceasing, your letting go of the reins. You have been operating as a secret co-savior, a silent partner in the divine orchestration of your destiny, assuming a responsibility that was never yours to bear. Not consciously, for your heart desires to honor God, but functionally. You have been acting as though the mission would utterly fail without your constant intervention, as though divine purpose requires your perpetual maintenance, as though God called you into his grand design and then immediately needed you to help him keep the whole thing from falling apart. It's a subtle but profound lack of trust in his sovereignty, his faithfulness, and his sheer capability. It's the belief that God might have started it, but you have to finish it, or at least shepherd it every step of the way, preventing any perceived deviation. And this is not a rebuke. This is not condemnation designed to heap more guilt upon you. This is a revelation, because the moment you truly see it, the moment this hidden root is exposed to the light of truth, it loses its power over you. The unconscious agreement begins to unravel, and the illusion of your indispensable control starts to dissipate, paving the way for a deeper, more liberating trust in the one who holds all things together. Joseph spent 13 years in situations he did not choose, could not control, and could not strategize his way out of. His life was a cruel tapestry of betrayal and injustice. The pit where his brothers threw him and left him for dead was certainly not on his vision board. Prison, where he was falsely accused and forgotten, was not in his 5-year plan. He suffered unimaginable hardship, isolation, and dashed hopes. And yet every single moment that looked like delay, like abandonment, like divine silence, every single one of those moments was God building something profound and unshakable in Joseph that the palace, with all its comforts and opportunities for self-promotion, could not have produced. He was not being punished in the pit. He was being prepared in a place where his own striving could not reach him, where his natural charisma and ambition were rendered utterly useless. It was a place where all he could do was simply be who he was, a man of integrity and trust that heaven had not forgotten his name, that the dreams God had planted within him were still alive, even in the darkness. He had to learn dependence, humility, and unwavering faith in God's timing, not his own. And the promotion, when it finally came, after years of silent suffering and faithful endurance, came in a single day. 13 years of silence, of struggle, of waiting in the shadows. And then, in 24 hours, everything changed. He went from prisoner to prime minister, from forgotten to fundamental. Not because Joseph finally got it right, not because he perfected his performance or flawlessly executed a strategy, but because the time was right in God's sovereign calendar. And those are two very different things: human effort versus divine timing and readiness. Your breakthrough is not waiting on your performance, on your ability to work harder, pray longer, or prove yourself worthy through sheer willpower. It is waiting on your positioning. And your positioning right now, emptied out, surrendered at the end of yourself, where your own resources and strategies have run dry. That is not the wrong position. That is not a place of defeat or failure. That is the exact position heaven has been trying to get you into for months, perhaps even years. It is the posture of radical receptivity, of open-handedness, of profound readiness to receive what only God can provide. The Bible calls it being poor in spirit, a state of spiritual bankruptcy where you recognize your utter dependence on God, acknowledging that you possess nothing of true spiritual value in yourself. And Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Not will be, not might be, is, present tense. The kingdom, with all its power, provision, and peace, already belongs to the ones who have arrived at the end of their own resources, to those who have finally surrendered their striving and acknowledged their complete need for God. Which means what you have been calling your lowest point, your moment of exhaustion, your period of perceived weakness or failure, is actually your highest access point. It is the very threshold where heaven's abundance awaits your open, empty hands. And yet, and this is the part that changes everything, the final thing heaven needs you to understand is this: you are not being asked to stop caring. You are not being asked to disengage from your purpose, to become passive in your calling, to let go of the sacred dreams God has placed within your heart. This is not an invitation to apathy or spiritual laziness. You are being asked to change the route, to do the same things, to show up consistently, to pursue your calling with passion, to give generously of your time and talents, to serve others with compassion, but to do them from a fundamentally different origin point. To act from a place of overflow rather than obligation, where your actions spring from an inner wellspring of divine life, not from a sense of burdensome duty. To move from a place of rest rather than striving, where your labor is an extension of God's grace through you, not a desperate attempt to earn it. To operate from an identity that is already settled, secure, and deeply loved, rather than one that is perpetually auditioning for approval or validation, because the same action done from the wrong route produces the wrong fruit. If you serve from a place of obligation, it will lead to burnout and resentment. If you give from a place of striving, it will lead to exhaustion and a feeling of being unappreciated. And God does not just want different outcomes in your life. He wants a different origin for those outcomes. He wants to be the absolute, undeniable source of everything you do, not just the destination you cry out to when you run out of strength, but the very wellspring you draw from before you take the first step, the living water that animates your every movement. This is the divine takeover you were promised in the opening of this message. It does not look like God swooping in and doing everything while you sit idly by, a passive observer. That would negate your unique design and purpose. Instead, it looks like you moving, but from a radically different place within your spirit, fueled by a different power. It looks like your hands still building, still creating, still serving, but your heart no longer white-knuckling, no longer clenched in fear or desperate control. It looks like your faith no longer being fueled by the anxious fear of what happens if you stop, or what disasters might unfold without your constant intervention, but by deep, unwavering trust in what heaven has already said about what comes next, about his unfailing provision and sovereign plan. And that shift, that simple, seismic, everything-changing shift from striving to surrender, from self-effort to divine flow, that is what closes the old season of weariness and opens the new one of abundant grace and empowered purpose. It does not require a louder prayer, a longer fast, or one more exhausting act of human effort. It simply requires you, finally, completely, trusting that what God started in you, He is more than capable of finishing. Tonight, before you close your eyes, place your hand over your heart and speak this over yourself, out loud, with your full voice if you can. I release the lie that my value is measured by my output. I release every agreement I made with striving, with performance, with the fear that God's plan cannot survive my rest. I release the guilt of the pause. I release the shame of the exhale. I acknowledge that every moment I thought I was failing, heaven was working. I receive rest as a divine assignment, not as a spiritual retreat. I receive my emptiness as my greatest qualification for overflow. I declare that this season of striving is over, that the weight I have been carrying was never mine to carry alone, that I am seen, I am not forgotten, and I am not behind. I step forward now, not in my own strength, but carried by grace that was already beneath me before I ever thought to ask for it. My surrender is not my defeat. My surrender is my greatest act of faith. And it is finished. If something in you broke open during this message, if something shifted that you cannot quite name, do not let that be the end of the moment. The enemy's greatest strategy is to let the feeling fade before the change takes root. The inner sanctum was built for the chosen ones who know they need more than a single encounter. They need a daily word spoken over their spirit to keep what just broke open from closing back up. The link is in the first pinned comment. You will know the moment you see it whether it was meant for you.